Good afternoon and welcome to our last funding and scaling of 2021. I am delighted to be welcoming you to from the DBIC managed GEC offices, a major milestone for us. This 100,000 square foot global entrepreneurial super hub was formally opened last week by An Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. And it's been an incredible year for the rest of the DBIC team too. There have been lots of challenges like everybody else, but they have been all met with great enthusiasm, resilience, determination, which when I say it like that sounds a bit like a startup. But with our superb team and our dedicated team of experts, managers and consultants delivering the most comprehensive range of startup supports in Ireland, we thankfully have lots to celebrate. And to share with you some of those headlines, they are: we completed our fourth Women Entrepreneurship Innovate programme in partnership with Enterprise Ireland. The Innovate series has entrepreneurs such as Willola, Examfly and Squid Loyalty successfully raise their HBSU matched seed fund. The excellent Startup Nation, how can we not tune into that? The founders discuss their journeys and share their learnings, and I would highly recommend tuning into that one. We had the delivery of the first Innovate Exchange programme in partnership with SkillsNet Ireland, a really valuable initiative designed to connect SME technology solution providers with large organisations that are facing digital transformation challenges. DBIC Ventures, they completed 2 new deals in Q3 and they have 6 new deals in process at the moment. And then on the angel business, the business angel front, HBAN, my own home team, we are on target to close out the year with 60 plus deals, securing 15 million euros in total funding. But back to today, we have an incredible lineup for you. We have a really rare opportunity to listen to Seán O'Sullivan, and he talks to Conor Carmody about his career, SOSV, and the big trends on his radar. And then following on from that and taking up some of the themes that Seán and Conor will discuss, I am delighted to be joined by a panel of experts from venture capital, Enterprise Ireland, angel investment and crowdfunding to take a deeper dive into the investment challenge landscape, impact investing, what funders are looking for now, and the challenges that founders face of impact and deep technology companies. As always, I will encourage you to send in your questions. We want these sessions to be as interactive as possible. And remember, I would always say to everybody, remember that nobody's born a CEO. No one knows this stuff until they ask the questions. So please don't be afraid to ping us in your questions. So with no further ado and with great anticipation, I am delighted to hand you over to Managing General Partner and founder of SOSV, Seán O'Sullivan, who is in conversation with Conor Carmody. Conor.
Let me introduce our guest this afternoon. He probably needs no introduction, but allow me to try. An engineer, a musician, a computer programmer, software designer. I think the list goes on, Seán. A war photographer when I was looking at your bio, so I'm going to come back and ask you about that. Venture capitalist and writer. So good afternoon to Seán O'Sullivan, Managing General Partner of SOSV. Seán, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. It's great to meet you, Conor.
And where are you today, Seán?
I'm in San Francisco.
San Francisco. Well, thank you for getting up early-ish to join us and to come in today. What did I miss in the intro? What else have you covered in this broad career of yours?
When you're 57 years old, you don't want the whole life-long catalog listed.
Yeah, I looked at the musician. You were in a band. You had a couple of albums. Is there anything you haven't done thus far, Seán? Or what's left still for you to do?
Life is full of mysteries, and I am constantly exploring those new mysteries, mostly in the form of helping startups in their journeys.
Very good. We'll get to that. I'm really looking forward to it. Can I ask you first just a little bit about you? So given that background, at your core, are you an engineer or have you moved on since?
Yeah, I mean, you often get these questions on the tax form or on whatever, sort of when you're going to the doctor's office, what's your profession? And I always put down engineer. I think engineering is at the root of problem solution, and engineering gives us the ability to have the greatest change in the world by scaling our ideas into reality.
But you've actually there's a lovely duality in your life, because when I was looking at your kind of academic background, you have a fine art master's and an engineering degree. How do you reconcile both sides of your brain with that piece?
Well, I think whenever you are approaching life, you have to consider all the suffering and all the conflict and all the education that you have, and just apply every tool you have in your tool set to what's at hand. Every day we make choices, an infinite array of choices as to how to try to, make a greater impact on the room that surrounds us, or the street that surrounds us, or the city that surrounds us, or the world that surrounds us. And, you have to call on all of yourself, not just, the things you learned at university, but also the things you're trying to bring to awaken in the potential that you see around you.
Because you have this lovely twin track where you're on one side, you've the angel, and we'll talk about it, your career, an angel investor, then leading up to SOSV and that big organization. And on the other side, you've also a very strong track around humanitarian work and actually that piece around giving back. So every time I look at you, and as I was preparing for this, you've kind of got those both sides going on within you.
Yeah, well, I relate to how I grew up and how the challenges I faced and the problems I see and the gaps that need to be filled in the world. And I do try to bring as much of the awareness of the art as well as the scalable engineering technologies to any problem I try to address. It's not just about the content of what you see, it's about the processes that you adapt to try to create change in the world. And I spend a lot of time trying to optimize the process of how I operate in the world to have the greatest impact. And not how but also how our entire organization at SOSV, 130 strong. As a VC, that's actually a large VC. There's not that many VCs, over around 6 or 10 people. So we have a special duty to try to increase our impact because of our size and the funds that we have under management.
Thank you. You're co-credited with the invention of the term cloud computing. Along with, I think it was George Favaloro at Compaq. So give me some background to
That's
that.
Right.
I mean, because today cloud computing is just a standard, but how did you, I suppose I'm interested in that thought process to envisage cloud computing.
Well, everything is in when you look at a problem, sometimes you have to abstract it. And when you, in order to understand what the direction is, that is the unstoppable force in the marketplace and the thing that will take the world forward. You have to find these unstoppable trends. And at the time that I came up with that term, there was this thing called client server computing that was in play. And before that, there was local area networks, and then before that was your own personal computer. So we were moving to a different phase in how everything was going to run, and I noted that, and I created an expression around it. The expression is kind of obvious in a way, but everybody's confused about why is it cloud computing. But it does come from some terminology that had been previously used in the telco world, where everything that was done on customer premises was called CPE, or customer premises equipment, and everything that was done inside the public switch network was called the cloud. And simply by adapting the cloud plus computing to it, that's the root of how the expression came up. There's more complications to it, but that's
it seems remarkably simple when you explain it like that, looking back maybe 20 years from a remove of 20 years later.
Yeah.
Can I, and by the way, to our audience, we're very happy to take questions. We have a couple that were sent in beforehand, and we're obviously happy to take them, and we'll curate them as we go through. Can I ask about the arc of your career, Seán? And what I'm interested in is how does somebody leave college in 1984 and end up running a venture fund with, as you say, 130 kind of employees, $1 billion in assets under management, and the amount of applications you get each year. So how would you describe that career as you look back in it now? And was it planned? Did it happen by chance, by accident? Was there a grand design when Seán was stepping out of college?
There was no grand design. I just face the problems that are in front of me and try to make a difference along the way. That's probably what's led me to having such a varied career. The reason I went back to the computing and tech area is because that's where I felt I had the greatest gift after the music industry and after journalism and photography. And I also had a child, and I wanted to see my child see me. I have 2 children now, and I wanted to have them have a reference of working really hard at something that was worth doing. So I didn't want to just lay about on some beach somewhere. I did have some early success, and I didn't need to work as hard as I do. Often people tell me I don't need to work as hard as I do. I'm often chastised for it. But I do find great joy in being of service to the things I care about.
Right. I'm going to come back later on if I have time, because there is this kind of movement, particularly around the US, the kind of this great resignation and the notion of work and enjoying work versus being forced to go to work. And if I have time, I'm going to come back to that. But I do want to ask you, as and you mentioned early successes, 1992 with MapInfo moving to SOSV. Did you consciously set out to say, you could have stopped and, as you said, lay on the beach. Did you say to yourself, there are problems to be addressed and I'm going to go about addressing them? Or was it, I found my way into it because I had made some money and I'll reinvest some and I'll see where this goes?
Oh, it was a little bit of both. So in terms of, creation of, So when my first company went public, and I think it was 1994, actually, so I was then around 27. And so it went public, and it was actually a very heartrending thing, especially I grew up in absolute poverty. So, having $1 million or, I think it was initially around 14 or $1 million that at the IPO, which actually these days seems like a really small number. But for me, it was an unbelievably huge number. And I would watch the stock go up and down throughout the day, and I'd be up $2 million in the afternoon and down $3 million in the next morning or whatever. And it was so disconnected to the actual work that I was doing that it actually made me, physically kind of sick, to not, to be just tracking that and to be tracking it all the time. And I can't understand people who really, I can understand it, the day trading aspects and all those sort of, I'm a long-term investor. I find that if you get in at the right stage and then you just let it, not just let it, you work actively to try to make a difference in making the outcome, better every day. That's the thing to look at. It's not to look at what your bank account is worth or what your net worth is any day. It's just to be sticking to the task at hand, to try to make the world around you a little bit better every moment. And so what got me into investing directly into startups is I realized that the money was a part of myself. It was a part of what I did, and I didn't feel that just leaving it in the stock market was is certainly better than buying a house with it or something. But I didn't feel that it was as productive as actually trying to create new things out of it. And so the best way to create new things out of those resources was to invest directly in people who are trying to solve problems and trying to bring change to the world. And so that's what I did. I invested in some of my friends that I knew or acquaintances in the Boston tech scene or in the New York tech scene. And then as it happened over many years, those results did, extremely well. And then I was managing hundreds of millions of dollars of my own money through the progression of time. by just investing in people that I knew and cared about. And at that point, I needed to build an organization, which is what I've done in SOSV, that could affect these changes to try to bring the world forward in the directions that I've noted are going to be of greatest need to humanity.
Lovely, and I'm looking forward to getting into those. Can I just ask you about an entrepreneur? So we have 600 people have registered to join us here today to hear you talk, and they're at various stages. They're building startups, they're scaling. The characteristics of the entrepreneur, and we hear a lot about this. And is it glib to say that you need to show, curiosity or tenacity? I mean, is it too glib to try and characterize an entrepreneur in a couple of kind of characteristics?
No, those are great characteristics, and there's more. You have to. I think you also just have to have your ear to the ground and be, really, really aware of the pain spots in the marketplace that need to be addressed. And probably most successful entrepreneurs are not in it actually for the money. I mean, the money will come if they affect great change in the world, and if their solution to the problems are, well framed, and if they are able to scale their ability to deliver those solutions to the market. But you have to solve a really urgent pain point for a customer in order for you to be able to succeed. So you need somebody who's a really good listener, and somebody who's really going to be, incredibly motivated to see the gaps that are in the world as they exist today, and then fill in those gaps with really concrete solutions. And that's, to me, the biggest thing about an entrepreneur is they're completely unsatisfied with the status quo, and they have this religious fervor or a passion to change the market in its, in whatever way, whether that's in creating some new computing device, or creating cures for various types of human diseases, or creating climate change technologies that can improve what our outcome and should be, either for a small group of people. You don't have to be looking at the whole world, or for a or for the planetary health needs and the human health needs. Okay,
so it's a curiosity, or it's an unwillingness to accept the status quo, and to say just because this is how it's always been doesn't mean this is how it is going to be. And I think that notion of continuing to push and continuing to kind of test the boundaries around it, I guess, is where we're at. Can I move to SOSV? And we mentioned you've probably $1 billion worth of assets under management at the moment. It's one of the largest kind of VC firms, if that's the right way to describe it, at the moment. What's your... Well,
actually, we're it's a little over $1 billion. It's probably $1.1 billion or $1.2 billion or something at this day. But actually, we're not in the one of the largest in terms of total assets. There's about 50 firms globally that are. We are one of the most active, and certainly we're the, often quoted as either the most active or in the top 3 most active VCs globally, because of the number of investments that we make. And we're making our investments at very, very early stages. We're generally the first professional investor, and that's what sort of distinguishes SOSV. We are the only investor that operates the way that we do in the world, in so many territories, with a focus on deep tech solutions and hardware and life sciences.
So explain it to me then, your philosophy. So what are you trying to achieve with SOSV?
Well, you're as someone who's not satisfied with the status quo, you're looking to fill in those gaps, provide opportunity. I think back to when my first company, when I created my first company right out of university. I just graduated, and I really wanted to solve this problem of creating street maps on computers. I don't know why I was so driven to do that, but that was the thing that got me going. And I by myself had no chance of making that change in the world. Just one person has no chance of making a change in the world. What you have to do is attract around you other like-minded people who believe in that mission, and then attract, sometimes you have to attract funding. Sometimes you just need to attract customers who are dedicated or have a need that your technology solves. And then you scale that. But that takes a team, that takes building all of this. And by myself, I was, I wouldn't have been able to do very much. So, I had a couple of people that really helped me, mentors, people that had already run and created businesses that had scaled them to tens of millions of dollars, or been, one guy, Warren Brueggemann, was a senior vice president of General Electric, was running a multi-billion-dollar organization. Harry Abkarian was running like a $60 million startup, which was a lot of money back in those days. And, and so they gave of their time just to advise me on, hey, this is how, and they gave me some seed capital as well. And, they joined the board of my company, MapInfo. That the guidance, that mentorship allowed us to thrive and to know what to do next, how to, what is a cap table? I had no idea what a cap table was. How do you raise capital? How do you close a corporate sale? What are the, processes that are necessary to take the company forward? And just having really good advisors. So in some ways, it's just getting back to the problem I suffered with as a 21-year-old and to try to make a difference in the world. That's all SOSV is doing these days, but we're just doing it at scale and against a certain problem set with people who are like-minded, who really want to see the change happening in the world. And that's the organization and the culture that attracts people to, SOSV. Some quarters we're ranked the most active investor in the world. And certainly in some markets, we're more active than in others. I think we're the number 6th most active investor in India, the number 2 most active investor in Pakistan, in the US, we're often ranked as number 1 or 2 or 3, most active investor. So we're just scattered all around the world trying to make a difference.
Trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
And you said there in your intro that your difference comes from probably that you're at the very early stage. You're happy to go in early with startups to solve the big problems that we're facing in the world. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think, what we're able to do that most don't, especially when you manage more capital, is that we are able to take outside risk, really outsized risks that, most people when the more money they manage, the more they focus on the later stages, like the Series B rounds and the Series C rounds, et cetera. If you're managing $1 billion, how do you deploy all that capital? We are happy investing in several hundred investments a year, 130 brand new companies and follow-on rounds into the companies we've already backed. And so, that's a different strategy than how most VCs would operate. And I think the greatest joy is in helping create that foundation of a business. But what that greater risk means is that we also have a great failure rate. And I guess I'm not afraid of failure. And it's a hard thing for the entrepreneur in every journey. But most entrepreneurs are going to be struggling all the time with failure, and sometimes their companies will fail. So we recognize that. I just looking at some numbers the other day, and if a company makes it to Series A that goes through the whole SOSV process, the odds are almost 100% that they will continue going on to Series B and Series C. And there's very little failure rate once you get to those later stages, but there's lots of failure rate until you get to those initial, until you have a product that's ready for the market and the market is buying that product. And that's the challenge that takes an incredible amount of courage, and we're just trying to help in that particular part of the journey. That's the biggest focus that we have. is in helping entrepreneurs on that part of that journey. And we only take part of the world that we're particularly dedicated to, where we're the world's most active investors in life sciences, and we're the world's most active investor in hardware. We're particularly dedicated to those areas, and we're particularly dedicated to the three themes of human health, planetary health, and the industrial regeneration, effectively, managing our new economies, particularly as it relates to the reindustrialization of the West.
Okay. You mentioned there the SOSV process, and that by going through that SOSV process, it enhances your chances of success. What is the SOSV process?
Well, we have these startup development programs, and many people, we used to call them accelerators, and there still are a lot of accelerator programs that are around in the world. People can join our programs and sort of skip the accelerator stage if they're able to get in. Now, we get 8,000, 9,000 applications a year. It's not that easy to get in. It's maybe a 1.5% or 2% chance to be able to get into our startup development programs. But we typically give, $250,000 or $500,000 in our first check. And we also have these physical facilities and the large teams that are helping our startups at those phases. So if you were to join HACS, for example, our hardware startup development program, you'd either go to our new facility in Newark, New Jersey, or you'd go to our facility in Tokyo, or in Xi'an, or in Shenzhen. And we have a team of engineers and designers and product management people and that can help in every aspect, from the industrial engineering, the design, to electrical or power, or all. We've actually helped 250 hardware companies get created, so we know a lot about how and what it takes to reduce your bill of materials, and how to manufacture effectively, and how to get your company financed by the people who know and invest in hardware companies. And we have a facility of we have facilities of 30,000, 40, 50,000 square feet, where we staff it with our own staff of dozens of people and hundreds of entrepreneurs that are working alongside the entrepreneur that we're backing. So it's a vibrant ecosystem that we've created in that area, and we've done the same in IndieBio with life sciences, with wet lab facilities that cost us literally tens of millions of dollars to build these facilities out. It's a very unique approach. Before SOSV, no VC really, I'm not sure if none, but it's so rare that it's pretty close to no VC had ever actually built out a facility for to enable their startups who are just getting a couple $100,000 to actually go straight into the lab and get the scientific results they need to get. Give them the money that they can do, say, animal or mouse studies, or whatever else they need to do to prove the scalability of their processes, and get running so quickly. So we found that by making our startups not have to spend so much money on the CapEx and just spending the money on the OpEx, with us providing all the sort of facilities and background staff, it really enabled our startups to go further and faster. And we're still the only VC in the world that has this approach. And, it resonates with some people.
Very good. It's an interesting question, because an audience question came up, and it was about that software companies seem to be easier to set up and to fund versus hardware companies, and hardware companies struggle to kind of find the funding. You've gone at it kind of differently. I see you smiling. Hardware companies have a particular attraction to you.
Yeah, I guess you could consider it a character flaw. Like, I always go after very difficult problems. And partly because I think there's so, yes, you can start up a software startup in your garage or, at your desk. But if you really are doing something in these spaces, you really need a lot more help. And these ecosystems have so much more benefit than they can offer. So it is a differentiation. We also have our cross-border programs in Taipei, Shanghai, and India that are geared more towards the traditional software marketplaces. That focuses more, and in blockchain as well. And those programs are also very notable programs. But around 3/4 of our investment is in the sort of the deepest of deep tech areas, which are the more hard problems to solve. Yeah.
So our audience, don't give up. You're on the right track with the hardware one. Can I move or change track slightly, Seán? And can I talk about this planetary health mission? And you mentioned these 3 big buckets that you're focusing on. At a high level, what are the big issues to be addressed from your perspective?
Well, I mean, you just look at planetary health as primarily a climate change problem and primarily an issue. I mean, there are other issues with pollution and all of those things, but if you have the right approach with planetary health, you're often solving multiple problems at the same time with your approach. The areas that we look at for planetary health and as it relates to climate change are, you can read the book from Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. It gives a pretty good categorization of how we basically need to reimagine every industry and start over so that we can have a decarbonized industrial planetary environment. And that means that goes from everything from agriculture, which contributes 19% of our greenhouse gases, to transportation, which is 16%, up to the biggie, manufacturing itself, which is 31% of our greenhouse gases are created through manufacturing processes. And I think it's 27% in energy production. Ireland is doing a great job in some of those energy areas, for example, and reducing through sustainable sources like wind and waves and not so much sun, unfortunately. But using sustainable energy productions, and that contributes hugely. And then so every industry that is doing any of those things, and also including heating and cooling of buildings, et cetera, every industry needs to really go at it with a different approach in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So when we look at agriculture, the biggest harmful agent in that is actually animal-based farming. And I know that there are a lot of animal farmers in animal husbandry in Ireland, and it's probably very hard to hear that, but there are obviously more cows and sheep in Ireland than there are humans, and these are producing very large levels of methane, which is contributing hugely to our global warming problem. So what we've done, for example, is try to eliminate animal agriculture where possible. And I wouldn't say eliminate. We're just trying to make the options better. So I think there will always be 10% of the market that wants to use a more expensive, animal-based product. But I think we can win over 90% of the market with higher safety, higher quality, and more sustainable, less harmful processes for creating the products that we normally would turn to slaughter of animals or of using animal husbandry to generate those products, whether that be milk or meats or other types of proteins that we generate from animals. That doesn't make me I totally respect, and I was a meat eater myself until 6 or 7 years ago when I realized I didn't need to do that. But we ourselves, I think, recognize that you have to change behaviors of people if you want to change our planetary survival and our planetary health. And so what we're doing is we're providing very, very good economical and safety benefits to choosing healthier food choices, which do not involve animals in the creation of those.
And it has been described, well, like what you're describing there, Seán, is a reimagining of the future of the planet and the way that we live, the way that we eat, the way that we heat ourselves, the way that we survive on this little island or this little planet of ours. And it could also be for the entrepreneurs who are on this call, it can also be described as this 100 trillion opportunity. I mean, within what you've described there are massive business opportunities that are arising.
Yeah. No. So I've been talking about the 500 to 1,000 unicorns that are going to be coming out of this, reimagining of our climate, reimagining of all of our industries so that we can have a sustainable planet. Because basically, every time you address the problem so fundamentally, the existing incumbent players, unless they move quickly, and generally incumbent players do not move quickly, their businesses are going to be very disrupted by the entrepreneurs that can courageously go in and reimagine the world in this way. So we would see every industry, every major industry that's currently a greenhouse gas producer being extremely susceptible to change. And we've seen it even with in the energy area. We've seen it with solar energy in the last 15 years, when solar energy was one of the most expensive and inefficient ways, from a cost perspective to generate electricity. And now it's it is the most affordable means of producing electricity that has ever been known to humankind in all of human history in just 15 years. So it's gone from being super expensive, like 85 cents a kilowatt hour, to less than 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And that means it beats everything. It beats liquid natural gas. It beats, certainly beats the heck out of coal, by factors. It's so much cheaper to generate electricity in sustainable ways. And wind has also come down hugely as well. So you can see over the period of a relatively short period that, massive change is possible. You just need to get on the right side of that curve and be working as hard as possible to move the needle away from harmful mega trends.
And for the entrepreneur, timing is everything. And are we on the cusp of that big change now? In other words, is the time now or to seize those opportunities?
No, you're absolutely right. Timing is critical. Like, I've been on the wrong side of that myself, where I've thought, hey, we're going to have this new technology. People are going to adapt it. And I've been out by 3 or 5 years. And if you're willing to wait the 3 or 5 years without scaling until the market is ready for you, then you could have a massive change in the world. If you're patient enough and you don't draw down too much capital, you're not getting too much impatient investor capital in your business until you're sort of proving out that the market is there, then you'll be okay. If you scale up too quickly, then your runway will be very short, and you will not be able to continue, operating your business. You'll lose by coming into a marketplace too early.
And the notion, Seán, or the idea of patient capital, in other words, the traditional VC model says we invest, you go and prove it, we exit, and it all happens nicely within 5 to 7 years. In the new world that you're talking about, the investment horizon for the VC must surely be longer than your traditional 5 to 7 year.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody wants to make an investment and 5 or 7 years later have the money come back to them. And at certain stages, if you're investing in, say, a Series C round or Series B round, that may happen for you. So you're investing in a company that's already a unicorn, already over $1 billion valuation. And then they have to have liquidity events after that. And you may only have to wait 3 or 5 years for that to happen or so. But if you're starting from the ground up, and if you're investing even in Series A companies, these Series A funds are often, they started with the intent of returning the money after 5 or 7 years. But in reality, those most VC funds last for 15 years, 16 years. That's the average length of a VC fund. So it's not quite as quick as everybody makes it out to be. And partly there's some that move extremely fast. But I would, if I was setting the expectations for a founder, I'd say, be prepared, 100% prepared to spend the next 7 years of your life struggling to get through the muck.
There's a lot of muck to have to struggle with. But my question was more, I suppose, about the investor, that in other words, the returns are going to take longer because the science has got to be developed and the tech has got to be developed in this new world that we're living in. So the idea that the investors, while their funds, may be looking for some early returns, arguably that's going to be a longer period of time.
Well, yeah, and some investors have ways around that, like selling into secondaries and things like that along the way, where they buy in early and then they sell out at, say, a Series B or Series C round. You're right. Is a long horizon unless you're coming in at the much later stages, and you have to be very, very, very patient with it. The good news is that the asset value is increasing at unbelievable rates. I mean, we've just come off the best quarter of the best year that we've ever had, and the year before that was the best year we'd ever had. So, it's hard to look at this and say that you're not seeing progress, and that everyone who's an LP and what you're doing. I mean, the whole marketplace has been extremely lucky in the last couple of years with not lucky, but there's been huge gains in the last couple of years, despite the challenges of COVID for most VCs.
Okay, I'm going to take an audience question, which is kind of interesting on what we were talking about, and it was the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN 17, I think, Sustainable Development Goals, in the context of startups, I suppose, as a framework for them to identify opportunity. Is that kind of a template to say within there are the opportunities of the future?
I actually look at the opportunities in a much more concrete way. I mean, you could go at it that approach. I would probably overlay the UN Sustainable Development Goals on top of whatever the entrepreneur's special skill set is in solving deep and challenging problems. So I would, if you have a vision and passion to create some new type of display technology or some new type of way of doing biomass generation or energy efficiency or something, then you'll find that afterwards you'll find that there are 3 or 5 or 7 sustainable development goals that apply to your mission. I think of it as an after the fact thing. As long as you are going after a market that matters. I don't think of it as the way I would start in developing my mission and who I'm trying to serve is to look at those areas. It could be a framework if you were sort of throwing out random seeds into the field as to figure out, maybe I could start there. But most entrepreneurs actually have already an area they're passionate about, that they're expert in, that they really want to see it make a change. And I would rather say that they would go at it from the reverse perspective.
Very good. Seán, we've about 5 minutes left, and thank you for your time. We're going to keep taking questions. Can I ask you, looking in, because you've got your office down in Cork, and hopefully hopefully we can see you over here sometime in the new year, and we can get you to one of our physical events if you come to visit the office. What is your take on the Irish entrepreneurial system at the moment? What are your guys telling you from the ground?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're a very active investor in Ireland. We have a special Ireland fund, and we've backed, I'd say, maybe 40 or so Irish companies over the years. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. And some of those companies have done extremely well. The ones that do the best are the ones that are competing globally. Those Irish indigenous companies that are then, frankly, other companies that come from out anywhere in the world, but this is in Ireland, because of the opportunity. in Ireland, and then use that as their launching pad for being world leaders. There are great things about being in Europe. There's lots of grant, money that comes for deep tech companies. There are challenges in Europe. It's difficult to get higher valuations for companies that are based in Europe or in Ireland, and so that it's still a great and leading market for startups, and you can see that with the success of so many Irish startups in the past. So we're going to continue to back great Irish startups, and we're seeing several of those companies with great success. And we're going to continue to partner our international partners with our Irish startups to help increase their stage on the world stage.
Very good. I have two questions left. One of our audience members, and we actually missed this, was healthcare. What's the big healthcare issue that if you were an entrepreneur you should be looking at and saying, I should focus on this? What's your take?
Well, for me, most of the healthcare issues, need to have this sort of feedback loop in them. And we've seen this with devices like glucose monitors, where you can actually put a patch on your shoulder and measure continuously what your glucose levels are. Therefore, the person who's using those technologies, which are effectively, creating feedback loops through cloud-connected devices that are able to monitor progress and then feedback to the human or to their caregiver as to how to optimize the treatment or how to get them through their suffering or their disease. So that is one of the big challenging areas. And then there's lots of molecular biology approaches that we look at in healthcare to optimize and to really, to take breakthroughs in discovery and then try to validate those and run them through the very, very long sort of FDA process of getting a drug approved. But there are some incredibly important technologies in these areas that are transforming. And I think all of us relate to the fact that we have those in our lives that are suffering from physical maladies. My mom died of Alzheimer's. My son suffers with autism. There's so much that we can do for these diseases and so many other diseases. I've had a good Irish friend who died a year or two ago who, had this glioblastoma, a cancer of the brain. And it's just awful to see these diseases continuing when we can actually make a change and we can stop these diseases from their progression. So the science is all there. It's just a matter of money and systems and working the way through the system to get these solutions and these cures to market.
Fantastic. Seán, we've about 30 seconds left. And if you were leaving college today, and you were starting a new venture, what would you focus on today?
Well, I would start before college. I'd probably start when I was around 14, which is what I did, and I'd start working in the field that I wanted to make the difference in. In my case, it was computing and programming. But frankly, I think if I had as much interest in biology, then I do think that computing is obviously going to be a great way of improving effectiveness going forward. But biology is really the science of this century that we're in, and all the machines and all the capabilities and all the enablements that we can create in reimagining the world through biology is probably the area I personally would have tried to counsel myself to do, knowing what I know now.
Fantastic. Seán, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you coming on from San Francisco to talk to us, and hopefully we'll get to see you in Ireland some stage early next year. Maybe we might get to talk in person.
I will definitely. I have so many interests in Ireland. I'm on so many boards, etc., that I have to be in Ireland virtually most of the time. I guess you're in a lockdown right now in Ireland, or approaching one. So I'll be back as soon as possible.
We look forward to seeing you, and thanks so much for your time, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Some of the things that I picked out of that discussion were around this planetary mission that Seán's been talking about. And, really interesting there to hear that biology, if he was picking something today and he was coming out, it would be around biology, it would be around the science, and the fact that, a lot of these diseases, a lot of what we have, we can actually cure. And that's kind of really interesting. I loved his insights on the size of the opportunity, the size of the fund that he's running, and the fact that he can move that from both this kind of big global picture right down into a local picture, and mentioning the fact that he has the office down in Cork, that he's ready to he's a very active investor here in Ireland. And I thought that was hugely interesting. And just to get a view of the fact that, as the world is changing, there is this great $1 trillion opportunity that he's describing in terms of how our world is changing, and the next phase of investment that we're about to see. So hugely interesting there, and we thank Seán for his time. What we'd like to do now is take that kind of big global picture down, and we'd like to bring it down to local. And we've a really good investment panel here with us today. So I'm going to hand over to our investors and to Niamh Sterling, who's going to take us through that. So Niamh and panel, thank you so much.
Incredible to hear the details of Seán's stories, key moments, his sort of sense his passion for what he does and his plans for the future. We were as wrapped here in the studio as I'm sure you were at home. And I'm delighted to be joined by my panel of guests and experts now to dig into some of those themes from an Irish perspective. I'm joined by Niall McEvoy, Enterprise Ireland HPSU Manager in the ICT, Richard Watson from DBIC Ventures, Faye Walsh, Drouillard is joining us from WakeUp Capital, and Chris Burge from Spark Crowdfunding. So thank you so much for joining me here today. Richard, can I start with you? There seems to be kind of changes afoot in the investing world. We're seeing an increasing number of micro VCs, increasing professionalization of the angel networks, and larger funds investing earlier through their scouting funds. So I'm wondering how you see these changes impacting on the Irish investment landscape.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in terms of micro VCs, there's a definite trend in the US. We're seeing a lot of sort of funds investing smaller amounts at sort of seed to pre-seed to seed stage. In the context of the Irish market, I think what we're really seeing is we're seeing a lot of international funds. There's a lot of liquidity in the markets, both public and private. And we're seeing a lot of international VCs coming in and scouting for deal flow in Ireland. So coming in and looking for Series A opportunities and beyond. I'd say a lot of the audience, not all, but are probably at seed stage, and our fund is focused at that stage. There aren't that many seed funds in Ireland, so there is a limited supply of institutional seed capital. We're very active in the market. What I'd say is, HBAN definitely, the various angel syndicates becoming much more professional in their approach, operating very much like VCs. And we're seeing individual angels generally writing smaller checks, but doing more deals.
And so more complex deals.
Which?
The deals are more complex.
More complex deals, exactly. So, there is that limited supply of capital. Not every company obviously gets funded at seed stage. But then if you're performing well, we're seeing international VCs looking in and coming in, the Sequoias of this world, Index Ventures and so forth, coming in and investing more at Series A stage than we would have seen sort of, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And Faye, Seán has discussed some of the big themes of sustainability, health, and how they comprise the greatest economic opportunity ever. Is there an opportunity for Irish entrepreneurs and investors to carve out a competitive niche across these themes? Which themes do you think, I suppose, do we have a natural advantage for over other geographies, and why might that be?
Absolutely, and I actually feel like Seán covered so many of the topics that does tie into what I'd like to share today, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think definitely the combination of the research grant capital available, universities heavily involved, government support, there's a great place for startups in Ireland, and already sets a really good framework. focus on these areas. However, a lot of the attention is traditionally, at least in the last 10, 20 years, has been focused on software and, seeking, as I always say, seeking the next stripe, but also in medtech and biotech. And I think the areas where there's a really great opportunity within Ireland is within food innovation. So, for example, ingredients for humans and animals. Also, sort of agriculture, obviously, as part of Ireland heritage, but really hasn't innovated in the way that it probably needs to be more sustainable. And it's required, really, if we're going to feed the world's population in the next century. So out of that could be sort of smart technology for managing the herd, for example. And then also food packaging. I think that's another area where Ireland could focus on and has a potential for. And then within the renewable energy space, I know Seán mentioned Ireland's really good at that. I think actually we still have a ways to go here. It was kind of him to say. I think obviously offshore wind is getting a bigger boost, but I think technologies that could make offshore wind even more efficient and effective. Also, we're going to need to retrofit a whole bunch of structures and buildings across the entire island of Ireland. Could this be a time and a place to innovate on those kind of technologies? For example, could we see the next Nest come out of Ireland, for water, for example? And then also, I think EV and light mobility infrastructure, I know that's being done in droves elsewhere. But again, Ireland's such a great testbed market. Is this a place or space where we could take all those learnings and focus it in on those other technologies? And then circular economy, waste management, biofuel, even though that requires significant CapEx expenditure, even just working on the research and development around those ideas for further commercialization. And then lastly, I know you asked about health. And again, Ireland has a great history of working in medtech and biotech, building widgets that go help save lives. But I think here we could focus on digital wellness solutions, remote diagnostics. I know Seán mentioned wearables and the Internet of Things, and being able to actually interpret that data to help with preventative healthcare. And then lastly, an area that you all know I'm very passionate about is femtech and basically products designed by and for women, because we just need more diversity in innovation, but also on the investor side. So hopefully that gives an overview of some of the opportunities I see here in Ireland.
Fantastic, Faye. And Niall, just turning to you and taking up from that, you see everything that grows and scales in Ireland, really, across all of those sectors that Faye mentioned. So what changes are in investment have made an impact in supporting growth of these companies? And what needs to evolve and change further to continue to enable VCs and angels to capitalise on this new wave of investment?
Yeah, I mean, interesting point by Richard earlier on about, the nature of the investment market in Ireland, in terms of seed stage versus growth stage. I mean, one of the things we've seen over the course of the pandemic certainly is the leveling of the playing field to some extent in terms of being able to access international capital. So there's a very vibrant local and domestic pre-seed and seed stage market. But we've actually seen we've seen plenty of companies within our portfolio have actually got pre-seed internationally and have got seed internationally. Now, some of that is a factor of definitely access to international capital through the pandemic, because people got more into being able to take remote meetings and it became the norm. You suddenly found yourself being able to have those conversations. And we've also seen, as Richard said, we've seen the emergence of large international players within the growth funding scene. And it's really, really key. And we're delighted to see it. I mean, Enterprise Ireland is the largest funder in this market, not just the funder of companies ourselves, but the funder of funds as well.
Absolutely.
But competition is good in the market. And the more international companies, the more international investors that come sniffing around Ireland for deals because they believe there's good value, they believe there's great early stage technology businesses, they believe in the global outlook and the framework that is there to support these companies. So, the likes of Accel and Index and Blossom and Tiger Global and Summit Partners and One Peak. They're just some names that I was looking up earlier and say, well, actually, what deals have we been involved in with big international deals? So there's definitely things have changed and moved. And in terms of what needs to change and what might change. I mean, there's the source of the capital, but there's also what the capital is doing.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer in the network effect that good investors can bring to the table.
Yeah.
And if I look at investors, and I've been involved probably in hundreds of deals in recent years through my role in Enterprise Ireland, but the one thing that disappoints me a lot is the impact of the network of investors. And I think some of that's partly down to the investors, but I also, without wishing to tar all investors with the lazy investor brush, right? Okay. But some of them, it's easy to hunt down the deal and be chase, got to get this deal done. Yeah. But then the deal's done, you're moving on to your next deal. But actually you've got to drive value into your engagement with the client. So, and I think entrepreneurs have a responsibility and a role to play there as well. As an entrepreneur and as a promoter in the business, you need to challenge your investors to make an impact in the areas that you're looking to do business.
Doors.
Oh yeah. I mean, never have a conversation with your investor, whether that's Enterprise Ireland, whether that's Faye, whether it's one of the guys here today, or whether it's one of the international investors that we all come across. Challenge them to add value to their investment. If you're not asking them to do something every time you engage with them, you're not getting the best value out of them.
Leave the meeting with an ask.
100% every time.
And Chris, just thinking in terms of these impact-driven companies, do you think they suit crowdfunding really well? And is there growing appetite amongst retail investors to invest in enterprises such as social and climate change solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. There is. We have numbers of focus groups throughout and we poll our investor base about these things, and they're very interested in doing so. In fact, we've actually got one on the platform right at the moment. It's obviously the impact investment covers a whole range of things, whether that be the climate change or the sustainability, but it's also about disadvantaged groups and people within that as well. And so Access Earth, who are on the platform at the moment, are helping to do that. They are opening up accessibility for the disabled community, and that's one of the things that they are doing. But more so than that, we've just rolled out last year we rolled out a competition, a university competition, which opened up a competition for students at third level institutions to try crowdfunding, to develop their business and their entrepreneurial skills, and that was a very successful. We had 80 competitors. We had 4,000 student investors, and we've just rolled it out into the UK as well now. So that opens up the ability for other people to kind of look at the democratization of investment and open it up to other people who might want to actually come into it.
Yeah, and people who are passionate about the causes that are launching technologies or solutions on those platforms, right?
Absolutely.
Richard, just looking at the increase of investment, there was a reported 280% increase of investment in technologies that are addressing these vital issues such as climate change and social equality. So how does that impact your investment selection process?
Firstly, we're not an impact fund, but that's not to say that we don't make investments that have impact. So, if you talk about the different sectors in impact, I'll talk about healthcare, which is really where we're seeing most of the activity in Ireland. If you look at sort of clean tech, renewable energy, we actually saw more. Ironically, several years ago, we did quite a few investments in the EV and energy storage space there. And then ag tech, we're seeing some deal flow in that space. And then ed tech, but it's not really impact because it's kind of white collar professional workers. It doesn't cover the UN sustainability goals. But going back to healthcare, that is one of the biggest areas we're seeing deal flow in. So in the area of med tech, we're seeing a lot of really good startups coming through the BioInnovate program, going through commercialization within universities funded by EI, and then spinning out. And we've got 4 investments in that space on the go. And also in digital health, we're seeing some good digital health opportunities. Like in our previous fund, we invested in a company called Silver Cloud Health, which is there to help roll out mental health services to people with depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues. And that's now being used by the NHS and was acquired. So we want to see the next generation of those types of companies coming through, and we are seeing some really good opportunities in the medtech and digital health space. So we're doing 4 investments in medtech at the moment. One would be, and these would be impact. So one would be in the oncology space, one is kind of late stage cancer, and then one is in the cardiology space for the heart valve space. So we look obviously at the intrinsic ESG factors with every investment that we make. That isn't really impact because they're the qualities intrinsic within the companies, and they obviously have to be favourable. We're not going to invest in any companies that have sort of negative
doesn't have that big
ESG, but we're probably seeing more focus on the G than the E and S because we're not seeing an awful lot of opportunities on the E and S side of things. But So, we're not an impact fund, but we are making some investments in that space.
And, tricky in terms of, Faye, I'll come to you on this one actually. Companies, how do they measure, their impact? That kind of is still a bit of a problem for some companies. And can you give us examples maybe of how entrepreneurs have demonstrated their potential impact to investors? What metrics and kind of validation are required to back up their impact proposition currently?
Sure, Niamh. And I think to answer that question, I just want to set the stage a bit. We were talking about the UN SDGs. The UN SDGs was launched 5 years ago, actually. This is not a new thing. They've been around since 2016. It's basically a shared to-do list for the world, right? It's not a framework or a tool where you measure. It's just a shared to-do list. I think for companies, this is an area actually that's pretty tricky because really, there might be the shared language, but there's no one framework or tool that's been accepted, by capital markets to measure impact. We're getting there. We're going to make progress, I'd say, in the next decade. But if you go back and think about how, global GAAP was developed, our accounting standards after the crash 100 years ago, that took decades to develop, right? I think with risk as well, we didn't really start measuring risk and investment until 60s and 70s, right, with some oil issues. And then now there are umpteen ways to measure risk. I think we're now in the next iteration of the development of our capital markets, and it's going to be around measuring impact and on society and on the environment. But the reason why it's tricky is because how do you compare? You can compare a dollar to a dollar, right? But how do you compare, for example, the creation of 1 kilowatt of renewable energy to a portion of carbon that's been captured and then resold? The announcement last week around International Sustainable Standards Board has been created finally to consolidate, because everyone's a little confused. Everyone's a little bit in the clouds on this. But I think the main thing is for companies to try to keep it simple at the early stage. It's certainly harder to go backwards when you're later stage, but you can do it. And maybe zone in on those 3 to 5 impact KPIs that you can identify. If you are around carbon capture, great, but there could be some other ones that you could focus on. And do you have the ability and capacity to actually measure the impact? Because many funds have said to me, oh, we've made impact investments. And I say, well, what did the investments do? Well, they made money. And I say, well, that's fabulous. But how do you know it actually made a difference in that sector? And I think, Richard made an example of Silver Cloud, which is great. And I'm sure they could go back and see how many people were able to then access services who have mental health challenges, but they weren't set about to measure that. And I think what's really important here is it has to be measured to be material. You can't just say your company and your product and service is going to do something if you can't actually prove it down the line. And I think we're just in the early stage of developing those standards. I think B Corp is doing some really good work, but we're not there. And I think the key is get more money, capital focused on impact, and drive the need to measure, accept that it's not going to be perfect. But hopefully we'll get to a point where impact is on the balance sheet and we all have a pretty good way of measuring it so we can solve these massive problems, because we really don't have a choice. We only have one planet.
Yeah, and measuring that double bottom line. Niall, you obviously see some of the existing tools. As Faye said, there are some existing tools out there. There's the Global Impact Investment Rating Scheme, which, as we were saying, can be difficult and tricky for early stage company to implement, and that's something hopefully they'll be able to hone over time. They and the market as a whole. Is EI seeing frameworks to evaluate companies within their portfolio with respect to impact?
Yes, we are. It's interesting. When thinking about this topic, it occurred to me that Enterprise Ireland actually is one of the longest standing impact investors around. When you think of what we do, actually, we're not a VC, but we're an impact investor in terms of looking to impact on the creation of jobs, exports, and economic benefit that accrues from that. And, when we look at how impact evolved for us in recent years, impact became some other things, like how can we impact on the number of female founders, women founders in business, and we set targets around that. So we, using our money to impact on that. And now we're seeing the further evolution of impact for us. All those things that have gone before, but also added to that now, the whole ESG framework. And when we look at our when we look at our recent seed and venture capital call, which thankfully I have to say went really well, and we'll see a significant amount of new seed, pre-seed and seed stage money in the market from early next year. But when we look at that, we use an evaluation matrix on all of the funds that pitched into the seed and venture capital call, and we are now looking at how do we. So that's looking at it from a fund of funds perspective, but we're now looking at obviously through the HBSU and the wider organisation. We're now looking at how we can use a similar evaluation matrix in terms of, as we take projects to investment committee, we'll be looking at actually trying to define specifically what the impact areas are, and we haven't nailed down the scoring mechanic on that because, as Faye says, this is hard. It's true, and but we will certainly be everyone on our investment committee, all of the senior leadership team at Enterprise Ireland, all of the key strategic stakeholders in the startup space here have a very, very close eye on the alignment of investment and the investment of public funds with the national policies with regards to climate and sustainability and all that goes around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, just to turn to you then, thinking with that in that frame of mind, can you talk to me about the different ways in which impact crowdfunding platforms can collaborate with other investors such as Enterprise Ireland, VCs and angels for impact?
Well, we do, and we have done. We co-funded a company that just closed a short while ago, both with Richard's DBIC Ventures and which was an Enterprise Ireland client as well, which is just closed now. So our mechanism by which we can collaborate with them is there already, and we're very willing to do so. But also, it opens up that network that Niall was talking about a short while ago. That kind of with more investors in there, big or small, doesn't matter. You're still opening up that network that can go out and start promoting that business, start kind of getting into those networks so that that business can flourish and grow. And with that democratization of bringing more and more people into it, it certainly just makes a big difference to that impact, and hopefully that business will prosper because of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, what key impact areas and themes are you seeing in your deal flow at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly in healthcare. And I mean, I really couldn't agree more strongly with what Faye said there. I mean, a lot of people claim impact, but the most important thing is it has to be measurable, right?
Yeah.
So, like the area, going back to what I was saying before, healthcare is definitely the biggest area that we're seeing, from an impact point of view. And some of the things we actually look at, like there's a lot of fluff. You can't really claim something's having an impact unless it's really kind of can be measured tangibly. But I think in healthcare, even with the likes of Silver Cloud, there was kind of tangible. They didn't set out to be an impact company, but by what they did, they reduced waiting times and improved, lower the cost of delivery of care. So, healthcare and digital health is by far the biggest sector we're seeing. Just with an aging population, people living longer with more chronic disease, it all comes down to health economics. What's the cost of delivery, the cost to the patient? What are the clinical outcomes? So healthcare is probably the area we're seeing the most, it definitely is the area we're seing most deal flow in. And
And Faye, I'll ask you the same question if I may. Would you say the same? Is it healthcare, or are you kind of looking more towards seeing more deal flow in terms of agriculture or?
Well, we focus across a range of different segments because I think that optimizes our best chance for success. Sorry if my connection's a little fuzzy here. So we would see definitely in the ag space, definitely things coming through, starting to see a little bit more in circular economy, but that feels a bit slower because there hasn't really been a carrot to work in that space as much as we would like. Within the health space, definitely there is, but for us, we don't really look probably at the same, maybe there's some overlap with Richard, but we're not looking at those that devices which would take tons of years of regulatory approval. So we're looking for kind of technologies that are a bit faster to get into the market. But would see some areas definitely within the aging population, wearables, and then also in fintech, accessible fintech. We see a bit of that. I know the UK often has more within the fintech space, but we do look there as well. You're seeing some really great innovations across the board, whether it's, again, reaching people with disability, or I made an investment recently in a company that's removing bias in the way that fund allocators make their investments. which is really interesting, right? So you're going into a whole different level. And then also you're seeing companies that are providing ESG ranking systems and for big corporates. So that's an interesting space. And then, there's a bit in the mobility tech. And then lastly, I would like to see more, but I am seeing a little bit of in the aging population, or the silver tech, I think is what they're calling it. So we look at quite a range because we think it's a better way to optimize our chances for success. And I think if there are more, and thanks to Enterprise Ireland, if there are more incentives to innovate in this area, we'll probably see more deal flow across the board. But I just don't think there has been the carrot to innovate as an impact company yet in Ireland as much as we need to do. So here's hoping in 2 years, 3 years' time, when we have this conversation again, I'll have a much more colorful answer for you.
No, absolutely. That's fantastic. And we'll be closer to silver tech ourselves at that stage, Faye. Niall, before I come back to you, Niall, for our final wrap-up question, I would ask if there's any questions from the audience, please do send them on in. And I know we have one or two coming in, so hopefully we'll have time for them. Niall, how do entrepreneurs on the call today identify and develop those big opportunities that we've discussed here today that are going to require, a different way of thinking and support to deliver on these opportunities? And how can EI encourage this? And funders?
Well, firstly, it is a stated ambition of our strategy moving forward to commit an increased funding and increased support services to companies that are making an impact on a whole range of clearly defined areas. And what I would say is, as companies now look, I always feel when we're talking about startups and we're talking about scale-ups, okay? We always talk about what does the customer need and want out of this, right? Okay, so, one has to look at the customer's ESG goals, right? Okay, and try to align with that. It's all very well building your own strategy around particular areas of impact, but I think the way you can maximize the value of that for yourself as a promoter for the company and to build a company of scale under this key strategic impact pillar is to make sure that you get completely aligned with the impact goals of your customers. If your customer can use what you're selling them to deliver for their message to their board and to their customer base about how they're making a difference, I think creating that alignment around your messaging, around your value proposition, can only lead to good things, because this is an area that's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter for all the right reasons.
So understand your customers' problems, work backwards from there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Richard, I'm going to come to you with this question. We have a question in from David. I want limited investment and mentoring to keep at least 85% control of the business, but this will slow my growth. Is it better to sell more to accelerate the business?
We come up against this quite a lot, actually. It's a great question. I mean, you do need capital at some point to accelerate, but you need to get the level of dilution right. I'm not sure what stage this company is at, or this promoter, but I would say if you're at pre-seed stage, you wouldn't really want to be giving up much more than that level of control of your business, because you're going to be diluted through seed rounds and so forth. It really comes down to, we do want to see companies bootstrapping and being really efficient and being able to do a lot with very little and demonstrating that kind of resilience. So I would say, we do see some companies, we've actually had turned down investments because they've given away too much equity at pre-seed stage. So it's important just to talk to others that have raised at that stage and make sure you get the valuation correct if you are raising money and don't give away too much equity.
Yeah, because if you give away too much, then it disincentivizes. But your investors, good investors, are not going to want to see that either, right? They're not going to want to see... No,
but you do see it with some privates maybe. They're not deliberately setting out to kind of scupper the cap table, but inadvertently they've agreed terms which, to a VC would be like, we see cap tables where companies have given away 35, 40% of the business before they've actually raised a seed round. And we know the journey that most companies go on, they're going to get diluted down. So
I think where it's more problematic, in this particular case, and look, all we've been told here is 85% is the magic number. But where we've seen that it's more problematic in terms of over dilution early, actually, is where you've got multiple founders, and it's very, very hard if you've got 2 or 3 founders, if they do give up that position too early. Now there are mechanics. And good investors, particularly Series A, B investors, will create the mechanics where founders maybe have got a little too washed out too early, because that's the last last thing investors want to see is founders being disincentivized by their diminishing position on the cap table. So there's plenty of tools, but those tools are not a reason to over dilute early. They're more a response and a solution to where it happens. But I think in the case of an individual owning all of the equity, I think, getting hung up on whether you want to own 85 or 75% sometimes for me can become the driving force in the quantum of the raise, whereas actually the driving force should be is how much money do I need to execute to maximize the growth rate that I can achieve in terms of building the team, building the product, and kicking on as hard as I can. And I would say to certainly sole promoters, or where you still own 100% and you're thinking about how much you give up, don't get overly hung up on this. And don't get overly hung up on valuation, because ultimately it's about, value creation happens in the future, not now. Yeah. And, I think it's about having the right mix of capital in place. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but we will have lots of time with our panel. Each of us are going to a breakout room, so you'll be able to join us there. You'll be able to ask us lots of questions, so please feel free to do that. Until then, I am delighted to say thank you, Niall, Faye, Chris and Richard. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here joining us today. And I'm also delighted now to hand over to Michael Culligan, from our CEO from DBIC.
I want to thank all of the panel members, and particularly perhaps to call out Faye, who's joined us online. And, that arena of femtech and female entrepreneurship is something that's extremely close to our hearts here in the Guinness Enterprise Centre. We have a number of really excellent female entrepreneurs based here, and it's something we're really positive about trying to build that cluster. Another area that was referred to today was the area of healthcare, and we're really delighted within our new enhanced Guinness Enterprise Centre that Niamh referred to earlier, formally opened earlier this week last week with Antónis Líomhar, that we have a partnership underway now with Mary Day and St James's Hospital in both the digital healthcare arena and also in parallel in the area of medical device areas, of which of course Ireland is extremely impactful. So please do, in a couple of moments, make your way to the breakout rooms. We've been running this series of events, funding and scaling now for a couple of years. And, today was really one that I was so looking forward to. I've had the privilege of meeting Seán O'Sullivan a number of years back. And, Seán is on record himself of referring previously and again today to his background, as he said, from abject poverty. And also, I know at a personal level, as he referred to today, he has a child with, autistic child. And I know both of those things have been extremely strong drivers for Seán. He's a man of absolute clarity of vision that came across with his, defining himself as an engineer. And what I thought was really, useful as a sort of a parallel for yourselves as entrepreneurs out there, or people building new businesses out there, is that whole area of, being passionate about what you do. I remember Martin Naughton, who founded Glendemplex many, many years ago, and, enormously successful around the world, but speaking about how important it is, of course, to have the long-term vision, but ultimately, it's about the perspiration and what you're doing tomorrow and the next day and next week and next month and next year. And you better be doing something you're passionate about. Seán referred to spending 6 or 7 years in the muck, or another way of looking at that perhaps is the resilience required to succeed in the entrepreneurial area. The vision, I think, and clarity of vision that Seán has brought, and the impact of what SOS Ventures are doing globally and here in Ireland, where we co-invest with them as well ourselves. I was particularly, interested in today's event insofar as we ourselves as an organisation, maybe briefly, as most of you will know, Dublin Business Innovation Centre is around for over 30 years. And, our role in life is to empower entrepreneurs to start and scale. But we are laser focused in that early area, be it providing business advice, helping you with your business plan, working in partnership with Enterprise Ireland, helping you get early stage money in, which could be through HBAN, or for that matter, the seed fund, or incubating you in a place like the Guinness Enterprise Centre and connecting you globally through there. So, the synergies, I guess, we've probably got a couple of hundred companies who've got money directly through either HBAN or our fund over the last number of years, and we're enormously and laser focused in that area. The big takeaway for me from today, and we see coming down the tracks like a train at some speed, is the say, change and opportunity that exists today. You know, the language out of Europe for the last number of years is the future is green, the future is digital. That's brought home to us in spades by the perspective provided by Seán on our call today. And the one thing we do know, folks, is time of change and uncertainty is time of enormous opportunity. There has never been time for greater opportunity. And, you know, in Ireland, we have a lot going for us. There is capital around, maybe not as much as everybody wants all of the time. Good businesses tend to get funded. Wonderful to hear Niall McEvoy referring to international early stage seed capital starting to come into Ireland as well. So, you know, in concluding, I want to thank all of our panel. I want to thank Seán in San Francisco for joining us today. We'll be back in Q1 with another one. I encourage you to join the breakout rooms now. And in wrapping this up, and we had over 600 or close to 600 people registered today, I want to put a huge shout out to our own team, in particular to Donna and Emma, who've led on funding and scaling for us today. And of course to Conor and Niamh, who've led the panels today and the interviews with Seán. So without further ado, time for me to stop and enjoy the breakout rooms and catch you all soon. Take care.